It has been 28 years since the outbreak of the zombie virus. Isla discovered a pregnant, infected woman inside an abandoned train carriage. Perhaps guided by an instinctive, maternal pull, she made a wild decision. She would deliver the infected woman's baby. She slowly raised her hands, fingertips trembling slightly as she tried to soothe the woman, while the intense pain made the infected woman grip Isla's hand tightly. A clear, sharp cry pierced the carriage's dead silence, and Isla quickly reached out to steadily catch the falling newborn. Nearby, Soldier Eric's pupils constricted sharply, his grip tightening on his weapon. He had no idea if a child born to the infected was already a monster like its mother. Isla called for her son Spike to come help, but paralyzed by overwhelming fear, Spike couldn't move an inch. Fear wound around his limbs like vines, and only when his mother's calls became almost hoarse did he tremblingly pull out a dagger to cut the umbilical cord. Isla fetched a cup of water and carefully wiped the blood from the infant. Watching these incomprehensible actions of mother and son, a wave of barely contained tension churned in Eric's eyes. Survival instincts screamed that both the infected mother and her child were threats. Just then, the infected woman on the floor suddenly convulsed, lifted her head, and lunged straight at Isla. At the critical moment, Eric's gunshot shattered the crisis, the bullet piercing the infected woman's skull with precision. Virus-tainted blood spattered the carriage walls. After killing the infected, Eric barked at Isla to put the baby down. Fear had long since devoured his reason, and he screamed that he must kill the child. Yet Isla shielded the baby fiercely in her arms, while Spike stood up, insisting repeatedly that the baby wasn't infected. But in this apocalypse, deep-rooted fear had long robbed people of the ability for calm thought. Eric stepped back slowly with his gun raised, when suddenly a pair of powerful hands yanked him out. The next second, a barrage of gunfire erupted, mixed with the sound of shattering bones and desperate screams, tearing open a gruesome wound in the wilderness. Only when the attackers leaped down from the roof did Spike realize it was the mutant-infected Alpha. 28 years earlier, in the Scottish Highlands, the Jamie family was watching Teletubbies by the TV. Suddenly his mother burst in, ordering everyone to stay put and not make a sound. As anguished cries and thuds rose and fell outside, Jamie crept to the door to peek. A blood-covered man staggered in, dropped down, and began savagely attacking his best friend. Jamie stood by helplessly as his friends fell one after another, then turned and ran toward his mother's room. But she firmly shut him out, leaving only one sentence: "Run!" before closing the door. The glass pane reflected the horrific sight of his mother being attacked. Jamie fled up the stairs in panic. There, he saw a relative vomiting torrents of blood. Then his mother crashed through a window, landing on the ground. With her last shred of sanity, she screamed at him to run. Jamie sprinted to a nearby church, the infected in relentless pursuit. Pushing the church doors open, he threw himself into his praying father's arms. Clearly expecting this, his father whispered that those people hadn't died. They had just received the deliverance they deserved. Watching the infected about to swarm through the windows, his father took the cross from his neck and pressed it into Jamie's hand, saying it was now his time to embrace this glorious moment. Jamie had just hidden in a side passage when hordes of infected flooded the church, falling upon his father and attacking him. Within moments, he became one of them. Once the infected dispersed, Jamie ran, vanishing into the vast, dark night. Years passed, and survivors built a sanctuary on an isolated island. People lived peacefully here, self-sufficient and content. Jamie gently woke his sleeping son, explaining that today was his rite of passage. He would step outside the community gates and hunt his first infected using a bow. While packing gear, Spike took the toy he'd initially put in his backpack out again. He knew that after personally killing his first infected, his boyhood identity would be shed. He would officially transform into a true man. Spike entered his mother's room. She lay curled on the bed, body racked by constant tremors. Seeing his mother suffering, bound by illness, a surge of deep sorrow washed over him. He couldn't recall when her severe sickness began. Hearing her husband plan to take their son to the mainland, Isla sat bolt upright, screaming accusations that Jamie would get their son killed. But in an instant, the fierce emotion vanished from her eyes, leaving only confusion as she looked at her son, asking what had just happened. Spike softly soothed her back to sleep, placed packed food by her bedside, kissed her cheek, and left the room. Community residents came out to see them off. In everyone's eyes, those who journeyed to the mainland were heroes. Bathed in the cheers around him, Spike felt an unprecedented surge of pride. The two reached the massive gate by the shore. Supervisor Jenny stated she could let them out, but if they didn't return, she wouldn't send a search party. Once they set foot on the mainland, they would have to survive on their own. The heavy wooden gate slowly creaked open, revealing a narrow path. The path, sticky with damp sand and crushed shells, stretched toward the hazy outline of the distant mainland. Jamie told his son this was the only way to the mainland, visible only at low tide, so they had to return before the tide rose. Spike curiously asked why they couldn't swim back, and Jamie replied seriously that dangerous currents lurked in the water, ready to drag anyone into the depths of the ocean if they weren't careful. They walked across the empty plain, the wind whipping dried grass against their ankles, making faint, rustling sounds. This was Spike's first glimpse of the true face of the mainland. This harsh and unknown separate world drew him in, making him lose himself. They moved through a landscape of pure apocalypse. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed from the crumbling ruins, and Jamie instantly became alert, his eyes sharply fixed on the forest. There, an infected individual stared fixedly at them, an unnatural fervor swirling in its murky eyes. Jamie pointed towards it, instructing his son to shoot. The infected crawled forward on its belly, slowly advancing towards them. Before setting out, Spike had mentally rehearsed killing an infected countless times. Yet as that mass of festering flesh drew nearer, his hand gripping the bow began to tremble. Jamie's steady reassurances gradually calmed Spike's nerves. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and aimed at the infected, which was tearing into earthworms. Neither noticed another infected crawling towards them from behind. The arrow flew. The infected's wail instantly tore through the forest silence, and after a brief struggle, it collapsed heavily to the ground. Seeing its companion fall, the other infected lunged towards the pair. Jamie reacted swiftly, knocking and drawing his bow in one fluid motion, quickly neutralizing the approaching threat. He then noticed a smaller infected nearby. He instinctively raised his bow, locking onto its form, but its small, frail outline finally made him lower his weapon. Jamie heaped praise on his son for his performance, and with their task complete, the two prepared to return. As they emerged from the dense forest, the ground suddenly started to shake violently. A herd of antelope charged ahead, a golden-brown wave rolling across the land. Spike held his breath in awe at the wild spectacle. In a world without humans, wildlife had finally broken free and roamed the wilderness without constraint. Turning onto a side path, they discovered a wooden cabin. Jamie whispered for Spike to raise his bow and stay alert. They meticulously searched every corner of the structure, and only after confirming no infected lurked in the shadows did the tension slowly ease from their bodies. Just as Spike stared distractedly at a dust-covered frisbee on the floor, a raspy noise suddenly came from within the cabin. Jamie immediately raised his bow and cautiously moved towards the sound. In the shadows, a crow pecked at the body of an infected individual dangling from a ceiling beam. Spike couldn't bear to look at the bloody scene, but Jamie forced him to confront it. This was something he needed to learn for the future. The infected's sudden thrashing startled Spike, making him stumble back. After the infected gradually settled, Jamie moved closer. By the dim light through a broken window, he saw markings carved into its back. He realized this person had been punished, hung here to attract other infected. Normal humans on the mainland were already rare, so such cruelty was not uncommon. Jamie stood and signaled for his son to end the person's suffering, but Spike, fingers taut on the bowstring, couldn't bring himself to release the shot. Even infected, he couldn't do it. At that moment, the infected broke free from the rope and crashed down from the ceiling. Seeing the infected lunge toward his son, Jamie quickly loosed an arrow into its chest. Spike, in his panic, managed to shoot its head. As the body slammed to the floor, a heavy sense of guilt crushed his chest. He couldn't understand why humans still couldn't coexist peacefully, even in the apocalypse. Jamie, walking ahead, suddenly halted. His eyes locked onto the serpentine blood trail winding through the grass. He swept his gaze around, searching for signs of the prey. They had hoped to bring back some rare meat on this trip, but following the blood trail, they found only the picked clean bones of an antelope. The stench of decay hit Spike hard, making him retch, while Jamie insisted he must get used to that smell. Spike then looked up and saw the antelope's head hanging from a tree, ripped away with its severed spine, the bleached white bone splinters gleaming coldly in the light. Seeing this, Jamie instantly pulled an arrow from his quiver, his eyes sweeping the area, tracking the infected's movements. Before Spike could ask anything, Jamie had already grabbed him to leave that bloody place. The path to the shore seemed just beyond the slope of the plain ahead when suddenly a single infected stumbled into view. Then, tens of thousands of infected poured forth like a dam bursting, completely blocking their path. Leading them was the mutant infected Alpha, its massive, hulking form casting a monstrous shadow in the sunlight. Jamie sensed imminent danger, urgently pulling his son back towards the forest. Alpha let out a roar, and infected swarmed in from all directions. The two of them ran desperately across moss-covered stone steps, the infected chasing close behind. Snarls and howls flooded the woods like a tide. Seeing infected on all sides, Jamie stopped, barking at his son to steady his breath and get ready, even as he drew his bow and aimed at the snarling monsters closing in. Overwhelmed with fear, Spike lost control and accidentally released the arrow too soon. Jamie quickly followed with a shot, killing the zombie that had closed in. More and more infected surged forward. Jamie roared for Spike to run, then began firing as he retreated himself. Seeing his father clearly struggling, Spike fought down his terror and shot an arrow, but it only struck an infected in the leg. Jamie bellowed for him to aim for the head or heart, then released his own arrow, and an infected dropped instantly. Staggering, they burst back into the cabin they had found earlier. An infected followed close behind, only to be met by Jamie's arrow through its skull. He boosted Spike up into the loft. Before Spike could get his footing, another infected lunged at him. As he killed it, Spike's foot slipped, sending him tumbling down. Jamie grabbed him just in time, hauling him back up. By now, the cabin was overrun by the infected horde. Seeing they hadn't yet discovered their hiding spot, Jamie finally relaxed, collapsing onto the loft floor. Through the broken roof, they watched the massive figure of Alpha beneath the setting sun. Jamie turned to look at his empty quiver. He knew they would have to rely on strategy to survive. Spike apologized for his earlier cowardice, but Jamie didn't blame him. Facing such danger on one's first hunt would rattle anyone. Seeing the path to the community submerged by the rising tide, they knew they'd be spending the night outside. Spike then noticed a distant firelight. Jamie stated he hadn't been to that area and didn't know what was there. Sensing his father's reluctance to elaborate, Spike lay down and drifted into sleep. Deep in slumber, Jamie's urgent shout jolted him awake. Spike opened his eyes to see the walls crumbling, bricks and dust raining onto the floor. They scrambled out the door just before the structure collapsed. Jamie walked up to Spike, gripping his shoulders firmly, telling him he must stay calm if they encountered Alpha, and just run straight for the community gate. Thick fog, heavy with the damp chill of the woods, wrapped around them as they moved through it. Arriving at the shore, they made sure there were no infected nearby, then took off their shoes and dashed through the water along the path. Just as the community gate came into view, a roar erupted from the hillside, startling a black swarm of crows into the sky. Turning, they saw Alpha like a moving black mountain, charging towards them through the waves. With a cry from Jamie, the two of them ran with all their strength, fully aware that if Alpha caught them, their heads would be twisted off and hung among the branches. Fear flooded Spike's chest in the pre-dawn darkness. His foot slipped, sending him sprawling to the ground, and Jamie quickly hauled him up to keep running. Hearing Alpha's ragged breaths closing in behind them, Jamie screamed for the watchtower lookout to open the gate. Hearing the alarm whistle, the guard rushed up the tower. Spotting three blurred figures racing towards the gate in the dark, he cranked a lever, and a beam of light instantly split the night, illuminating the coast, and revealing Alpha's hulking form rising from the surf. Jenny barked an order, and dozens of arrows whistled through the air, embedding deep in Alpha's chest. A deafening roar followed as he crashed to his knees in the water, yet the next second, he rose again, arrows studding his body, crimson eyes fixed unblinkingly on his prey. Seeing this, Jamie grabbed Spike and resumed their desperate run. Realizing arrows inflicted no damage, Jenny ignited a massive spear. Just as Alpha lunged towards Jamie and Spike, the flaming spear hurtled through the air, impaling his torso. The colossal body slammed into the sea, sending up a spray of murky water. Jamie dragged his stumbling son to the massive gate, kicking it furiously and yelling for Jenny to open it. After confirming neither Jamie nor Spike showed signs of infection, the heavy wooden gate groaned open, pulling them into the safety of the barrier. The community threw a grand celebration for their triumphant return. During the feast, Jamie spun wild tales of their hunt, painting his son as a cool-headed hero. Spike was filled with confusion, knowing he'd been a liability, yet his father concealed this. Walking alone outside that night, Spike witnessed a jarring scene. His once admired father, intimately entangled with another woman from the community. Helpless disappointment washed over him instantly, and his worldview shattered completely in that moment. Panicked, Spike ran home, found Sam from the community, and told him the whole truth. Hearing Spike mention the hilltop firelight, Sam stated gravely, it might be his old friend Kelson. Kelson had been their family doctor before the outbreak, but contact was lost after the virus hit. Early the next morning, Spike asked Jamie if he knew Dr. Kelson. Jamie bluntly stated Kelson wasn't a doctor, just a so-called madman. Once, during a supply run, they saw Kelson lining up hundreds of corpses in a row and lighting a bonfire beside them. They had no idea what he was doing. When he spotted them, he even waved for them to come join. Hence, no one had dared enter that area for years. To Spike, however, this explanation held no weight. Kelson seemed the only possible savior for his mother, whose illness remained unknown within the community. His father had concealed the existence of a doctor in another region. When Jamie heard his son mention his affair, he immediately raised his hand and slapped Spike across the face. This slap ignited a fire within Spike, as the urgency of his mother's worsening illness had already spread deep inside him. His father's provocation shattered the last bit of hesitation he had. The confidence gained from his previous ordeal surged within him now. He resolved to find the doctor everyone called a madman. In his eyes, a doctor, a profession scarce on the island, perhaps symbolized omnipotent power, the only hope to save his mother. Spike set fire to a barn to distract the gate guards, then resolutely led his mother onto the path of salvation. As they stepped onto the only route to the mainland, they bid farewell to the so-called utopia and officially entered the wild lands of the New World. Gazing at the endless horizon, Isla suddenly had an episode and insisted on returning. Spike held her tightly, whispering they couldn't go back, nor did he want to return to that gilded cage. The people there had long lost the will to change. Passive fear and laziness under a closed system had stripped life of its original meaning. Hearing her son's words, Isla gradually calmed and walked alongside him across the empty land. Night fell, and they took shelter in a derelict church. Spike sat by the door intending to keep watch, but exhaustion soon pulled him into deep sleep. In his drowsy state, an infected dragged its broken body towards him, grabbed his shoelace, and began chewing it voraciously. Discovering it wasn't a worm, the infected drew closer to Spike. At the critical moment, someone pulled a sack over its head. Spike woke at dawn to find the infected corpse lying beside him. He turned to ask his mother, but Isla only looked blankly back. Clearly, she had forgotten it was she who fought desperately to save her son the night before. Meanwhile, several soldiers stumbled through an industrial building, pursued by countless infected. One spun around and fired wildly into the horde. Suddenly, an infected dropped from above, pinning him to the floor. After biting two men, the infected immediately rose and continued chasing the others. Seeing their comrades infected, the soldiers had to shoot them down in agony. Just as they prepared to retreat, one was tackled by another infected. The last three men slammed a heavy metal door shut against the infected swarm, then switched on headlamps, groping for an exit in the passageway. Only their pounding heartbeats echoed in the dark, silent tunnel until a noise came from behind. They spun, finding nothing. The next instant, the mutant-infected Alpha burst from the shadows, grabbed one soldier, and ripped out his spine. Before the second soldier could reload, Alpha struck and broke his neck. The last remaining Special Forces soldier retraced his steps, pulled open the iron door, and narrowly escaped with his life. Walking through the fields, Isla reflected on her past with Jamie, but now it all had turned to dust in the wind. Spike then noticed an infected creeping up silently behind them. He slowly raised his bow and shot it through the chest, splattering blood across Isla's forehead. Spike rushed to wipe it off, terrified virus-tainted blood might seep into his mother's eyes. The infected creature's agonized howl instantly attracted a large swarm of infected, and Spike tightly gripped his mother's hand as they ran desperately across the field embankment. Mud flew from under their pounding feet. Spinning, he drew his bow and dropped an infected that had almost reached them. They lunged towards a roadside shop, but the door seemed welded shut. No matter how hard they shook it, it wouldn't open. Just as the snarls pressed against their backs, the bolt suddenly gave way. They tumbled inside. A pungent gasoline smell assaulted them. The infected that barged in stumbled, disoriented. Spike pushed over tables and chairs to form a barricade, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and slammed it into the leading infected. Yet more and more infected poured in. Spike was clearly being overwhelmed. Beside him, his mother's coughing grew more frantic. The thick gasoline fumes were choking her. They were forced into a corner by the advancing infected. In despair, the skylight above suddenly flew open. The surviving soldier unleashed a hail of bullets downwards. The intense fire ignited gasoline fumes filling the shop, engulfing the entire building in an orange fireball instantly. Spike and his mother, sheltering under a table, narrowly escaped the inferno. Scorching heat waves whipped their hair, their ears filled with the roar of explosions and the sickening crackle of infected burning. Having inhaled too much toxic gas earlier, Isla crouched on the ground, her head racked with pain. Hearing they had escaped from the island, Eric, though displeased, considered encountering survivors rare in the apocalypse. He hoisted Isla onto his back and decided to travel with them. On the journey, Eric shared why he was here and what was happening in the world beyond Britain. They paused for a brief rest in the fields. Dappled sunlight fell on Isla's face as she gradually regained her composure. Walking ahead alone, she suddenly heard a scream. Following the sound, she came upon a derelict train and saw a pregnant, infected woman. Survival instinct screamed at Eric that the infected mother was a threat. As he stepped backward, he was suddenly yanked onto the train roof. Seeing the attacker was the monstrous mutant-infected Alpha, Spike screamed for his mother to run. Alpha's crimson eyes locked onto Spike. He charged forward only to be met by Spike's arrow piercing his chest. Isla, clutching the baby, darted swiftly between the train cars, afraid to look back at the horror. Seeing his kind attacked, Alpha smashed through a door, charging wildly towards Spike and Isla. Spike raised his bow again, but nothing could halt his frenzied advance. Alpha's guttural roar made Isla tremble uncontrollably. Spike shouted desperately for his mother to run towards the nearby defense zone. As he fired an arrow, he slipped and fell. Just as Alpha was about to pounce, Dr. Kelson, appearing from afar, blew a dart that froze him in place. Confirming Alpha was immobilized, Kelson retrieved Eric's head from his grasp. Isla, seeing this nearby, finally let out a breath of relief. Arriving at Dr. Kelson's dwelling, Spike finally understood everything. Everyone had misunderstood the man. On this apocalyptic wasteland, Dr. Kelson might be one of the few sane, normal people left. In the 28 years since the mutated virus ravaged the world, he had found land that repelled the infected, discovered iodine could block the virus's spread, and created darts to induce sleep in the infected. Using his professional skills in preparing ancient corpse specimens, he gathered the remains of nearby deceased individuals and constructed a magnificent cluster of memorial towers, honoring the dead while also preventing them from reanimating. Spike recounted their journey to him. After examining Isla, Dr. Kelson gravely announced she had breast cancer. Her frequent mental confusion was because cancer cells had spread to her brain. Isla had actually known for a long time she was terminally ill. Seeing her son had lost all reason trying to save her, she stepped forward and pulled him into a tight embrace. She knew they couldn't escape this crisis, and despite her deep reluctance and overwhelming pain, she ultimately made the difficult decision. Kelson had once said there are many ways to die. Die in pain or die in love. She had him blow a dart to knock her son unconscious. Isla leaned down, whispering in his ear that all people must die eventually. Then, with one last, longing look back, she followed Kelson into the endless darkness. Perhaps her surrender was the greatest gift she could give Spike. Kelson placed Isla's skull before Spike, telling him to choose the best resting place for his mother. Spike climbed the tower and placed his mother's skull at the very top. Below the tower, sunset smoldered over the wasteland. Distant ruins sketched faint outlines in the hazy twilight. Perhaps this was his final farewell to her. Kelson pulled Spike into an underground passage. Above them echoed Alpha's circling roars as he frantically rattled the metal door, unable to break through. Just as Kelson and Spike thought Alpha had given up, the wooden planks above shattered. Alpha grabbed Kelson, trying to drag him out. Seeing this, Spike pulled a dart from his pack and jammed it into Alpha's arm. After parting ways with Kelson, Spike began his journey back. He reached the community before the tide rose, left the baby at the gate with a note naming the child after his mother. Clearly, he intended the newborn to symbolize the euthanized mother. At that moment, death and new life intertwined within him. His mother's existence continued in another form. Jamie saw the baby and his wife's note. His emotions shattered instantly as he charged out of the village gates like a man possessed. This father, perpetually passive, numb, and faithless in the future, finally, after losing his wife and son, truly tried to chase something for the first time. Alone outside, Spike spotted an infected in the distance. He immediately drew his bow and shot it down. Then, grabbing his pack, he fled down the highway, only to find the path ahead blocked by a rock slide. As more and more infected closed in, at the critical moment, Jimmy appeared with his team and rescued Spike. Joining Jimmy's team, Spike thus entered a new chapter in his life.